Hello, and welcome to First Christian Church's Adult Fellowship Bible Study. We continue in the middle of the book of Revelation with today's lesson covering chapter 10. I should start this off by saying that there's not much agreement, or maybe a better way of saying it is there's a lot of disagreement among my scholarly sources relative to this chapter. So today's lesson will be a little more random and mixed thoughts than usual as I try to summarize their inputs for you. They do, however, agree that this chapter is another one of those interludes which is occurring now between the sixth judgment plague that we ended with last week and the seventh one, which is yet to come. The same type of thing that we saw between the sixth and seventh seal opening. The more evangelical sources seem to focus their comments on this being a chapter that gives command to the church to prophesy, while some others remark that some churches have used it more to support that they're doing that, and they don't necessarily support that idea. The Anglican scholar Christopher Rowland of Queen's College, Oxford, England, teaches that these 11 verses in this chapter, and this is a short chapter, do seem to focus on commanding John to witness and prophesy. He says that doesn't mean that he's telling the church to do that, because there is no specific reference here to the church. Dr. Eugene Boring and Dr. Fred Craddock in their New Testament commentary, these are both disciples, ministers, and scholars, by the way, the need for we readers to understand John, where John is coming from here, is critical. He says John is coming from the book of Daniel. He is going to build on the story, the apocalyptic story in the book of Daniel. And so the first 10 verses of chapter 12 of the book of Daniel is essentially being reiterated and modified here. They and some scholars say that it's extremely important for us to make that connection. That just like the previous chapter tied in with the book of Joel, this is tied in with the book of Daniel, the prophecy of Daniel. It is a key source of John's revelation, which he takes Daniel's version, reformulates it here based on what the early Christian belief was. Understand that Daniel is Old Testament, pre-Messiah. The Messiah has now come. So Daniel's theology doesn't fit with the Messiah having come. And therefore, he's reformulating it to make that fit. And Daniel there too is this mighty angel that speaks of a great tribulation to come, followed by resurrections and judgment. But that angel commands Daniel to seal up the revelation until the time of the end. Then 2 other angels appear here, one on each side of a river in Daniel. John takes that stream imagery and modifies it into where he seems to be having more of his imagery into the total cosmos, and proportions it then with this angel standing with one, or straddling a continent, so to speak, and the ocean, 1 foot on land and one in the ocean. Daniel asked the key question that his suffering people are asking. In other words, Daniel, Babylonian time, asking the question his people are suffering. How long is this to last? How long is the suffering to last? Or how long is it before the end? That angel says in Daniel, time, 2 times, and half time, which scholars have interpreted to mean 3.5 years, or 1260 days. That is when the sealed books is to be opened after the tribulation starts, based on Daniel's book. But something important has happened since Daniel's time. That's critical, scholars say, several scholars point out, for us to make that connection. So the theology needs to change. The Messiah has come in the form of Jesus Christ. It is clear that John and the early Christian believers understand that they're living they think they're living in the eschatological last age. That is the time before Christ returns. They considered, many scholars say, that time began with Jesus' baptism, not with his birth, with his baptism. That 3.5 years had already started, they felt. They are experiencing that tribulation as they perceive they were experiencing a time of trouble, such as there never had been. So, in other words, that the Christians at that time in John's community seemed to have that idea, several scholars say. We saw that same idea in Paul's writings. So there's not much time left. Of course, they seem to have stretched that 3.5 years, or maybe they didn't understand, as we have interpreted, that Christ's ministry was 3.5 years. Thus, the key message here in Revelation chapter 10 seems to be that time is up. There will be no more delay. It opens with the descent from heaven to earth, here in chapter 10, of a mighty angel shrouded in clouds with a rainbow, who is straddling the sea and the land. Scholars suggest that rainbow implies this is the one who shows mercy. The God of the Old Testament. The God of the Old Testament shows mercy, despite the fact that there's plenty where there doesn't seem to be. Some cite that the image of God, Christ, and the Spirit, angels, all seem to coalesce into one. They go back and forth in Revelation here, as well as in much of the Old Testament. All 3 of those roles, what we refer to as the Trinity, that we see those being interchanged. Here, the ultimate revealer is God, though. Not all scholars agree that that's who is revealing here, but most seem to point in that direction. Who presents himself in the communication as an angel. Or others would say, no, it is Christ who is that angel here. It's clear that it's a great angel. John modifies it a great seems to be a greater angel than normal. Seems not to be one of the archangels. It's higher than that. Clearly, that angel in verse 6 makes it clear that the message is from God, the Creator, however. That's there in verse 6. It's very clear that where the source of the message is, regardless of who the messenger that's delivering it happens to be. And the message is clear. There will be no more delay. No more time. No more time for what? No more time for punishment and no more time to repent. It's going to be up when the whistle blows. Recall Christ had authority to open these seals. That was the very opening of this book of Revelation when the seals are there. One of the issues was who is qualified to open them? Christ was qualified to open the seals. And that had been done. So the seals have been opened. Note the angel is holding an open scroll here, not a sealed one. That scroll was sealed in Daniel. It is now open. Then 7 trumpets spoke, and John was ready to scribe what they said. And then he received a command. He was forbidden to write what he saw and heard. Seal it up. Do not write what these 7 voices of thunder have to say. Some scholars note that John has not provided us with consistent logic here. He seems to be switching back and forth without logical reason. Others say he has, in that God is free to revise his plan, and that what's happened here is God has suddenly revised his plan, which he seems to do whenever he wants. That's what God is. The God of the Old Testament was not a computer, as one modern scholar says, but a God that adjusted and revised with mercy. He even repented in Jonah and Jeremiah, for example. Our God is real and merciful, one scholar said. That rainbow there is quite significant. That is right out of Judaism, they say. The rainbow is a signal of mercy, God of mercy. The mercy towards what? Mercy towards humans. Dr. Eugene Boring remarks that in this chapter, John is not just a spectator or reporter, but he seems to become a main character from time to time in it. That open scroll in the hands of the angel is meant for John. He is commanded to take it and eat it. There is nothing here in the Greek scholars say, to imply he is to read it. But most people suggest that this is clearly metaphoric language, meaning that he is to read it, consume it, understand it. Recall that Ezekiel, in his vision, received a similar command to consume the message, which we have historically assumed to mean to understand it deeply. The idea is clearly here that the message that's contained will be sweet in the mouth, but but when you devour it and ponder it and try to digest its words, it will make you sick at your stomach. In other words, the message sounds good on the surface, but the more you think about it, the more upset it's going to make you. Exactly what that scroll contains is not said, but the direction of its meaning maybe is. But many speculate it is related to God revealing his judgment and salvation plan. That seems to be what John is prophesying about, but other scholars sign off that no, that's not it. The key point being made here is there is to be no more delay. I think that seems to be clear, and there's decent agreement around that point. When that seventh trumpet is sounded, the mystery of God will be fulfilled, as the prophet said. And if you read there, you will notice that there is a definite article the word the, in front of the prophet there in verse 7. Which prophet is that? Since it's not a prophet, the prophet. So therefore, which prophet is being referred to? Some say it refers to Daniel, or others just Old Testament prophets in general, they think. But others argue this is maybe John the Baptist. In other words, early Christian prophet. The point is that clearly the message that John the Baptist prophesied seems to be the issue here. That is, it's time to repent right now. There's no time going to be any time left. Now is the time. It's running out. That was John the Baptist's message. Several scholars teach that the church of Paul clearly believed that God's plan and purpose for humans had been made clear in the Old Testament prophets, and that John the Baptist had taught it as having been fulfilled in the Messiah's arrival. Thus, they believed repent was the command that John the Baptist was giving. John, the author of Revelations, seems to have inherited Paul's churches, in other words, these churches that were mentioned right there in the opening of Revelation. Who founded those churches? Paul and Paul's extended ministry. Now, who seems to have those churches? He's writing to them in the book of Revelation, to that same group of churches. We just see some additional names from the ones, but the ones that Paul had in that area are there. So John is writing to people who already believe this. He's just reminding them to stay their course. So John is not prophesying some speculation here for that audience. He is writing to those who already have this belief, but who are under great persecution, or soon to be under great persecution. He is trying to confirm to them that we're on the right track. We have the right message. Stay the course. Do not fall for idolatry, despite how difficult it's going to be. This is a message of hope. That we know the end of the plan. We know how it's going to happen. Therefore, despite how difficult it becomes, do not fall for idolatry and swear that the emperor is your God. The message then is that time is clearly about to run out. Repent and make yourself right with God, or right now, or also, if you're already right, stay that course. Above all, stick with these convictions that we have. Don't allow yourself to be influenced. The physical pressure on you and the mental pressure on you is going to be severe. Dr. Brian Blount of Union Theological Seminary in Richmond, Virginia, says we tend to lose the focus as it does not fit in the chronology of things. John in Revelation does not hold to chronology. He's all over the place. His chronology is confusing, and if you try to map it out chronologically, it's very confusing. That's not what he's trying to do. As he does, he goes in and out of time. John really is not writing a chronological theology, he says here. Forget that. That's not what John's writing. But a theological concept. I like that. I think that makes sense. Chronological theology here, he's not saying this is how things are going to happen. This order, this time, and so forth. This is a concept. He's jumping around, but repeats chronology only within those series of 7. But he's going to go back to the start again when he starts the second series of 7, and so forth. And then he pauses just before the 7th step each case. So we will see, as we've seen before, the seals were open and the plagues that were associated with them. Now the trumpets and the plagues that are associated with them in judgment. And then we'll see a series of bowls and so forth. He gives the end as he approaches the 7th one each time. Thus the end occurs several times, because big part of the message is we're near the end. Time's about to run out. Each 7 series represents the same chronological time course, several scholars teach. Literary scholars teach this is an extremely effective piece of writing when looked at from the concept that John is using repeated time courses for dramatic effect. We learn in verses 7 through 11 that God will be faithful to those who have obeyed his will when it comes to salvation in the end. But he tells John, you must prophesy again about this to the many nations, the many tongues, and the many kings. Why? People ask. Because it implies that people will continue to be born and influenced. And you must continue to teach and prophesy, as there will be multiple generations. Several scholars say this is about the continuation of time as much as it's about time absolutely ending. In other words, John is using repeated time courses to indicate that's the way life is. That's the way society is. That's the way humans is. There will be generation after generation after generation. The end of each, so called the end of each generation, you place that. This is the mission, therefore, that many who say this is the mission for the church to pick up on. Revelation is the assignment of that as the mission. The church, therefore, adopts this as its role, and it has to teach generation after generation. So what is the timing here? Several ask. When we look at it on a simple time course, we are in, as one person puts it in a concept of basketball, we are, and I think we here in Kentucky can kind of relate to that. We're in the second half, seems to be the idea. Apocalyptic thinking suggests time is close to the end. That was a concept in apocalyptic thinking throughout history. We're in the final minutes of the last half. There are no timeouts left to delay the game any longer while you play with idolatry. Understand that. When the whistle blows, it's up. The game's over. The game ends when that final trumpet blast or final whistle blows. Be ready. That's, folks, kind of where the scholars bring some of the points they bring out, trying to help us understand this chapter 10. I'm sorry it's as confusing as it is. It's not straightforward, but it's the best I can do with what I find available to bring to you. Hope to see you again next week. Have a good week.